So guys, here is my review of Final Fantasy XVI. First of all, we have to address the fact that Final Fantasy XVI plays out slightly differently to all the other predecessors in the franchise, in the genre. This game plays out a lot like an action-adventure game, which is totally different to what we're normally used to. There is definitely Final Fantasy elements sprinkled in here, but there's a lot of things that we're going to talk about that are not typical of what we're used to. Again, not necessarily a bad thing, but you have to understand this game is slightly different. So all the things that this game did correctly, I feel, are first and foremost the environmental design and the setting of this game. I really enjoyed the kind of dark, gritty nature of this Final Fantasy. It was obviously M-rated, and that was definitely a good start. A bit of a difference to the airy-fairy magic and chocobos kind of theme that we're used to. Again, I'm very fond of that too, but to have something refreshing like this was nice. I also like when games take a more mature approach because it opens up a lot more themes that they can cover rather than just good guys win, bad guys lose. The plot in the story was a good length and fairly robust, which I quite enjoyed. There was a lot of different factions, and it was a complex enough story in my opinion without getting too complicated and too out there and wacky as Final Fantasy sometimes can become. We'll talk more about this later, but for the time being, at least the game gave you value for money. There was a decent amount of playtime in this game, and that is definitely to be commended. Character acting and voice acting combined with the fantastic facial CGI and general animation of this game made a really nice experience and a very modern game. This was top tier, and Final Fantasy always kind of delivers in terms of its cutscenes, its acting. However, this game kind of nailed that out the park, and all of the cast done it extremely well. We were playing on English, and it was so beautiful to see all the different British accents coming together. Obviously, I'm going to be biased on this, but to have so many different accents from the same kind of area of the world was nice because it made all the characters feel a lot more believable. As always with a Final Fantasy game, you expect the score and the music to be kind of on point, and Final Fantasy XVI did not fail in that regard. I felt like the music was really good. 10 out of 10 for the music, really enjoyed that. My favourite part of this game, without a shadow of a doubt, is definitely going to be the spectacle and the cinematic kind of masterpieces that were the boss fights in this game. Now, I'm going to develop that a little bit in a second, but for the time being, all you have to know is when you play this game, one of the things that they have obviously put a lot of their budget and their efforts into is the boss fights. How they blend gameplay together with the cutscenes is so smooth and it's so satisfying, and I really enjoyed this. One thing I have to include here is that there was a really nice main romance coupling in this game. Obviously, you have Clive and Jill, and the relationship was not necessarily focused on young lovers falling in love. It was more of like a mature, long-spanning relationship over many years, which realistically, for Final Fantasy at least, these characters, you don't often get to see a relationship with characters in their 30s. They were already in love, and we were just watching that progress, which I thought was quite unique. Lastly, the performance of the PS5 was pretty good, with the exception of a couple of render distance issues here and there. Sometimes when you go into one of the wide areas and there are flying enemies in the distance, I know this is like a cliche thing, but it was pretty noticeable at times, and I think if they managed to iron this out, the rest of the game was pretty smooth. So next we have to obviously move on to some of the criticisms of this game, and I'm going to nitpick this a little bit more. Know that I did enjoy Final Fantasy XVI. I mentioned this in the center of the review rather than at the beginning or at the end, but obviously we have to talk about some of the downsides and some of the things that I think were maybe left out or maybe forgotten by the wayside, or maybe they ran out of time to develop, or maybe they just didn't prioritize. So first and foremost, the main one that we have to discuss is that the side quests definitely felt uninspired in this game, unrewarding, and generally I felt like they were tacked on. Now, I've seen people arguing about this online, and I won't get into it too much. In my opinion, 95% of the side quests in this game were very filler and very bloat and very unnecessary. There were a few meaningful side quests in the game towards the end, which I thought were actually genuinely useful. They were genuinely fun, and sometimes even poignant at times, but only at the end of the game. The rest of it was very filler in my opinion, and the majority of the stuff you were doing with Clive was just being a mailman. It was obviously clear that they were going for, hey, this Final Fantasy is going to be about your boss fights. That was a 10 out of 10, but unfortunately as a result, the contrast to that is that everything you were doing in between sometimes felt a little bit lackluster. The XP given per quest was totally sporadic at times, and the rewards were also non-existent. The loot in the game was also pretty much non-existent. Again, the feature felt like an afterthought, and there was no incentive or any reason for me to explore it in the game and find chests, because all you were ever going to get was fangs and beast hides and occasionally 5 gil, which was a bit tragic in my opinion. There was a broken and fairly pointless economy in the game as well, which was a bit disappointing. Again, an RPG to me is all about customizing your team, customizing your tactics, and that includes things like your gear, your weapons, your armor, your magic spells, maybe even buying power-ups or things like that. There was nothing for you to buy, and sometimes the quest would give you gold in random quantities, or it would give you an item to sell to make gold, but you quickly realize after selling your first few goblin coins that it's unnecessary. You don't actually need to generate any gold. The game does start out fairly narrow, which is something that a lot of people have been also discussing, but it does open up over time. Your first like 5 to 10 hours will feel extremely linear as you play this game. game. You're traveling down hallways, which is not any different to games like Final Fantasy XIII or Final Fantasy X, or maybe even some of the other games that you guys know and love. Again, I've seen this topic discussed over and over, but you guys just need to be aware that this is the case. I don't want to critique this too harshly, because I know that some people really enjoy having a straightforward kind of area of exploration. Again, that's up to you guys, so make your minds up on that regard and let me know in the comments. I don't mind the lack of markers for the hunts, guys, but when I'm navigating this world map, it did feel a little bit clunky at times and a little bit bizarre. There was no minimap, and I have no idea why that was left out of the game. Maybe they were trying to keep the UI and the HUD as minimalistic as possible for the sake of like immersion. I've seen some games try to do this, but I really do think that this game would have benefited with a minimap, even if you could toggle it on and off. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out where to go for the hunts, and in the end, like what a lot of you guys probably did, I ended up Googling a lot of the locations. You can zoom in on your map as a pro tip and see all the details of the areas, but I only realised this after a decent chunk of the game, and I feel like this was unnecessarily painful at times. Although the combat was very engaging for me, like I said earlier, I enjoyed the boss fights and even some of the mob fights as well. I do feel like the skill tree did feel a little bit shallow, and I think the reason I'm mentioning this is because in the beginning I was so excited. When I first laid eyes on the skill tree, I felt like, my gosh, this game is going to do something truly magical. It started off extremely strong, but when I quickly realised that the original wheel of moves that you are given in the beginning, that these are like 80% of your abilities for the rest of the game, I just felt a little bit heartbroken, because again, you get your abilities later on with your icons, and you can upgrade your abilities, and that's enough. Honestly, it is enough, but I really was a little bit sad because I felt like this skill tree was going to expand in a really wide and incredible network of abilities and give you a lot of choice as a player, where in reality it doesn't really. You know, as soon as you see your first string, that is the majority of your combos. And again, there is enough complexity in the game. There's definitely enough to satisfy your average player and your average fan. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying I was a little bit let down when I realised it wasn't going to go further than I first originally saw. So this is going to be a hot topic, so let me know what you think. The game's formulaic nature, which started off as a boon for me, eventually led to it becoming a bit predictable and slightly monotonous. You can tell the way they've almost developed the game in the sense that every chapter has hordes of random mobs that you fight, often the same mobs over and over again. Then you'll have a mini general with some more mobs, and then another mini general, and then eventually you'll have the end of chapter boss, which is what everybody's looking forward to. Some people might enjoy this, and it does allow you to kind of gauge where you are in the chapter, which is quite nice sometimes. However, I feel like once you realise that is going to be the setup for most of the game, it does become, as I said earlier, it becomes kind of predictable. If they could have found a way to maybe slice up this gameplay and morph it slightly so it wasn't just the same generic do this, ABC, then that would have been nice. One of the things I did really like is that when you went to fight the final boss, you actually weren't forced to fight through tons and tons of trash mobs. You were actually just, hey, we're going to the final boss, and then you were straight in there to that kind of epic showdown. I really thought they were going to give me hordes of trash to fight through, and in the end they didn't, so kudos on that regard, Final Fantasy. That was a nice surprise. We're getting to the end of the review here, and some of my final tips. I want to just cover a couple of like little tiny small issues. Again, this game was pretty phenomenal, and I'll give you guys my conclusions in a second, but there was this weird thing where when you're trying to talk to characters, there was this little denial symbol that would pop up when you're trying to speak to NPCs in the world. I don't know why this existed. I like being able to just walk up to someone and push X and then talk to them immediately. Again, this is very minute, but small walls, gates, I couldn't jump over these sometimes, and it felt a bit clunky and a bit boxy, which was a bit of a shame. Your Chocobo that you get, obviously Ambrosia, very nice storyline with Ambrosia, and it was nice that they tied that into the beginning of the game. However, the Chocobo itself felt a little bit slow, and I think that when this game comes to PC, there's a lot of stuff that could be modded into the Chocobo to just make it a little bit better. The Chocobo felt slow, first of all. Dismounting and mountain felt slow, and in addition, I don't know why every time you got on the Chocobo, you got this little fanfare, which would sometimes interrupt the really nice and pleasant music that the game had going on. I don't understand why, although the plot was fantastic and I really enjoyed following what was going to happen with the characters. I don't know why Joshua, after his, false death at the beginning of the game, I don't know why he waited 13 plus years to approach and contact Clive. At first they were kind of alluding to Joshua being a bit of an antagonist, and he kind of like slowly led Clive along to his destinations, obviously to Phoenix Gate, and he was kind of pretending to be this like hooded figure. I don't really know why he did that. I don't know why he couldn't just approach Clive and be like, hey brother, because they didn't really have anything against each other. So I'm not sure why he was fucking around in the shadows pretending to be a Death Eater. Also, in addition, Clive's mum, although Clive's mum was a fantastic character in the sense that she was a horrible, evil antagonist that everybody was absolutely hating online, I feel like they did a good job with the creation of Clive's mum's character because she was unbelievably evil. However, I don't know why she was the way she was, because there didn't really seem to be any motive for her to be as evil as she was. In addition, the payoff that of her her death was also not very satisfying. I was expecting that to be really horrific. I think a lot of players probably wanted her to go out in a ball of flames screaming, and that didn't really happen, and that felt a little bit shit. There was also a couple of characters that were built up that didn't really lead into much. For example, Yote or Yara, the medical girl, or even Otto. I feel like they had a bit of chit-chat, but they didn't really have any point or substance in the game, which was a bit of a letdown. Again, wasn't bad because they were all nice characters, they were all fun, but they didn't really lead to anything, and it was almost like they were built up at times just to exist. All in all, I feel like 16 is a strong addition to the franchise, and I'm glad that they decided to try things out this way. I feel like there's going to be a lot of players who will play this, realise that Final Fantasy can actually be incredibly badass, and I think that will be great moving forward, because obviously our future Final Fantasy games will hopefully be given a little bit more of a budget, or they'll be taken more seriously, or more effort will be invested into them, and that's always a plus. The only thing I would say is that sometimes the game did drag its heels for me personally, and I did have to force through some of it. Again, this is mostly due to how formulaic the game felt, how kind of copy-paste each kind of chapter sometimes felt like, and also because some of your traditional Final Fantasy RPG elements were also a little bit missing. You know, this game was good, but I think you could have had an absolute masterpiece. Certainly nothing to be disappointed with, and I hope that you guys enjoyed the game if you did get around to playing it. I've been Mr. Wolfy, thanks for listening. Make sure you let me know your thoughts. Do you agree with any of my points? If you disagreed with some of my points, please let me know. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you guys in the next video. Take it easy, and yeah, peace.